They're worried about cancer. Obesity is one of the biggest risk factors. How is it, and this must make people question, why are we targeting protein? From a very conscientious standpoint, why would that be the target? We know that dietary protein affects skeletal muscle. We know that having healthy skeletal muscle improves all-cause mortality. It improves your survivability. Why are we now, you have to ask, what is the agenda behind now saying that protein is bad for longevity?
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today joins me to discuss the obesity epidemic and explains why the population is not over fat but under muscled. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon returns to the podcast for a second time to share some of the latest research and insights around health, wellness and longevity, as well as debunking a lot of the confusing misinformation being pushed out in the media and social media. We covered a lot of ground in the interview, including nutrition for children, weight loss, bone health, the organ of longevity, Liver King, protein powders, and the science of muscle building. So please enjoy this week's episode of the Escape Your Limits podcast. And if you get any value whatsoever, then please give us a like and a share so we can get this information out to more people. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for inviting me to your wonderful place in Encinitas again.
Yeah, thanks for coming down.
I was looking at the last episode and it was one of our most popular. We had over 250,000 views and tons of questions. So I was kind of excited to do a part two, really.
I love it.
So how have you been getting on since we last spoke? Have you had a lot?
Yeah, well, I'm not pregnant for this interview. I suppose you wouldn't know what that feels like, but man, very excited that I'm not pregnant. So hopefully not nauseous for this one.
Good, very good.
Yeah, but been busy. Launched a podcast, finishing up my book, had another child.
So another child since then. Wow, you're
Don't
it's all that protein
that
your other half's having.
Yeah.
So one of the things that when we spoke about last time, we were talking about, I think it was at the end of the interview, and we were talking about how much muscle you need. Mm-hmm. And I know at the time it was one of those unanswered questions.
Yeah.
Have you been able to sort of define that since last time in any way?
I think that it's really interesting when we think about muscle mass. When we think about muscle and we think about adipose tissue, which is kind of the opposition tissue, we know how much adipose tissue is going to create illness. But we don't know how much skeletal muscle mass is necessary for optimal health.
Okay.
Which is really a fascinating concept. We know how much would be an issue in terms of sarcopenia. For example, how little muscle mass. And that would be by looking at appendicular skeletal muscle mass index. And there's charts and things of what that looks like, but we don't know optimal. We can guess. There's conceptually ideas of what is optimal, but I would say definitively we're not there.
Still not there.
Yeah. Eventually, I think eventually.
Is it a difficult thing to figure out then? Is there a lot of research required to be able to work that out as it relates to people's size and things?
A really good question. Well, in the appendicular skeletal mass index, it is weight divided by height. There is a way in which you can plug that in. However, skeletal muscle is difficult to look at. And the reason is because there are different fiber types. You're not necessarily assessing the quality of the tissue or functionality, whereas fat tissue is homogeneous. It's easy. When I used to go and do fat biopsies, the fat looks the same.
Right.
But when you look at skeletal muscle tissue is heterogeneous. It has different kinds of fibers and tissues of that nature.
So I was watching an interview where someone was talking about a big guy that had quite a lot of muscle, very strong, but he also had a lot of body fat. And you were talking almost like about this marbling that you kind of get on. I suppose I can imagine what you get on steak, a good steak. You want that marbling. So is that the other thing that makes it tricky? So you could still have quite a bit of muscle, but the muscle could also have fat into it.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things I think that there's a bit of a division amongst people, is that people will say the heavier you are, the more muscle mass you have because you're carrying around that body fat. Yes, that may be true, but again, we're not looking at the quality of the tissue. And we know there is some evidence to suggest, and this is really out of Gerald Shulman, he kind of pioneered the way at Yale, is that insulin resistance really begins in skeletal muscle, way before people begin to put on weight. And if you have extra adipose tissue, that almost always affects skeletal muscle. We can't just look at the amount, the mass, we do have to look at quality. And by the time that you're putting on weight, we know that the quality's been impaired.
Right, okay. One of the things that kind of came up in conversations, like we work with a lot of fitness professionals, and they were saying that, fit pros push the importance of muscle and strength training. So it's not a kind of a total secret for people. But if you look at the sort of medical profession, they seem to resist pushing that as a solution and instead prescribe, drugs, despite what they know about diabetes and things like Alzheimer's. Why do you think there's not more of a push from the medical community, which I guess you're part of in some way?
I'm trying to bridge the gap. Fitness professionals, I think, are going to be the key in interfacing the concept of muscle-centric medicine. When we think about fitness, oftentimes we think about aesthetics or sport performance. We think globally about the concept that exercise improves survivability, it helps prevent disease. The missing link is I don't think we really focus on the fact that muscle is an endocrine organ, that above just exercise and training for cardiovascular health, it interfaces with the immune system. It secretes proteins called myokines. It does a whole slew of other things above and beyond the idea of physical capacity.
Right, okay.
And that's what I think is so interesting. And as we begin to educate medical professionals more along these lines, then I think that there's going to be a convergence. But right now, it's fitness professionals and then the medical community. But if we can integrate the two by teaching and understanding that, it's really interesting. We talk a lot about diet. Can you improve metabolic endpoints through nutrition? Yes. But exercise, that is a much more potent stimulus in actually changing metabolism, in really creating flux in substrate utilization like glucose and amino acids and fatty acids. So exercise is really the pinnacle. One of the reasons, your original question is why? Why are we not interfacing? And I do think that it's lack of knowledge and really the underappreciated role muscle plays.
And you I suppose, you would think that because the other point that was raised was resistance training, immunity, the inflammatory effect as it relates to COVID-19, which is a fairly recent thing. And so again, you've got governments as well and the medical advisory boards. They're also not mentioning anything about strength training. And is it because because I did a podcast a while ago and someone was saying, well, governments, there's no really good data from the fitness community, so maybe it's relying on the medical community, but it seems the medical community don't fully embrace it because they seem to be prescribing drugs. So where do you as an individual sit? Do you sit as, I suppose you kind of sit a little bit outside the medical community in some ways, but looking at following some of the stuff that your mentors and reading about them, they're all very, and including yourself, very highly respected, doing a lot of research. Is there a sort of like another field of people that are maybe seen as a little bit sort of quacky, or how would you sort of define that? Because they're smart people, but they don't seem to be getting the acknowledgement from the right people like governments, etc.
Well, we know that government entities take a very long time to adopt new strategies. For example, dietary protein didn't even come into the nutritional guidelines till I think, 2010. It was the first time it was acknowledged, maybe. So you mean to tell me, it wasn't even looked to change. Not that it first came in, but there's been no change in the dietary guidelines for protein recommendations for 30 years. There was a 30-year period where there was no change. And I believe it's just very slow. You know, there's only the time, energy, money are finite. And muscle physiology, muscle experts, they do exist. As it relates to interfacing with obesity, in my professional opinion, it goes back to kind of a fundamental way of how we look at problems. We look at the problem, we're very, I don't want to say negative based, but we are, as opposed to what are the things that we could do 10 steps ahead to prevent issues. Very proactive as opposed to reactive type medicine.
Don't you think though that when you're looking at all these drugs and they have to accelerate the approval, and maybe most of them seem to have, I've not seen many that don't have any side effects whatsoever, even a small percentage of people, where something like, okay, well just try and incorporate some strength training and here's a basic guideline of what you should do. It seems as though the risk of doing that compared to any kind of drug seems to be a lot lower. It's like, well, you can't really go too wrong. So why not just kind of at least put it a little bit about it? I have no
idea. It's a huge oversight.
One. Yeah.
It's a huge oversight.
Do you think there's not a lot of money in that, and it's it doesn't get?
I think it's difficult.
Okay.
I think right now when we think about the general public, we can tell them to train. Does that mean they're doing it? And it's free. The end result is here's a free thing that you can do that's going to change your survivability and who knows, prevent 35 different diseases. Will you do it? Well, you'll do it.
Yeah, obviously. But
however, I think there's a level of friction that happens to begin to overcome potential weaknesses or overcome individuals' discipline or roadblocks. It's much easier to take a pill.
Yeah, it is. I do think that there is some people though, like if it's on the agenda and it's being talked about, you're going to get some people like, oh, okay, maybe I'll give it a go, but just not putting it on there and not even.
It's terrible. I mean, we can all agree it's a huge oversight.
That's strange. So, well, I guess that's what you're doing a great job of, and hopefully more people that understand this will realize that it's free and give it a go.
Yeah, and I think if we move the conversation from physical fitness as the endpoint to the concept that muscle is the organ of longevity and that it's the focal point, it's the pinnacle, not the periphery. Right now, we focus on adipose tissue, we focus on symptomology endpoints, but by the time individuals have gained weight, we're behind. There's some great data of sedentary, younger individuals who are insulin resistant, and we are seeing issues with skeletal muscle insulin resistance in their 20s. And they're not overweight. They don't smoke, they're healthy, but sedentary. And we've domesticated our capacity, our society, our way of movement. Now movement is optional. It was never optional before. You're going to if you were not moving and you were not doing things, you were going to die.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we've now implemented, the human machine was designed for hard work. We've taken that off the table. And then we wonder why we have all these issues. And as it relates to interfacing governmental agencies, it's hard work. And the question is, are people willing to do it? And are the people in power even training themselves?
Yeah, or in most cases.
Right, so it has to be somewhat top down.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, I suppose.
Yeah.
Introducing the next big thing in functional training, the Escape Barrow, a revolutionary training tool that combines a loaded farmer's carry with a sled push to develop hip, grip, and core strength. Developed in partnership with Pete Holman, inventor of the TRX Rip Trainer and Nautilus Glute Drive, the Escape Barrow can be rolled, pushed, dragged and carried. The Escape Barrow packs a punch with an impressive load capacity of 440 pounds, and with a 2-stage galvanized paint covering process, it's also ideal for outdoor use. So head over to escapefitness.com/barrow. That's escapefitness.com/barrow to find out more. Enjoy the rest of this episode. You mentioned longevity, and this came up quite a bit. I was looking at the comments, and this one will be an interesting conversation. But so there seems to be some questions about particularly as it relates. We talked a lot about protein last time, and I was particularly interested in this because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when I was looking at some people's comments, and there seems to be one camp where it's like, okay, look, you know, protein and strength for longevity is really, really good. And then there's another camp, a few sort of popular people on YouTube that are talking about this, where it's like, okay, well, if you have protein increases mTOR, which I don't know what it is, and I'm going to get you to help explain that, okay, and IGF-1, and which is good to grow, but if you want to live longer, it's probably better to sort of have a lower mTOR. And I wanted to break this down. You know, one, what is mTOR and IGF-1? And two, why are people sort of saying that you need to be quite careful with, you know, stimulating that if you want to live longer?
Yeah. mTOR is mechanistic target of rapamycin. It is a protein complex in all tissues. In the pancreas, in the liver, in skeletal muscle, it exists in all tissues. It's been maintained in humans forever, which is incredible. Mechanistic target of rapamycin, or mTOR, is very interesting and stimulated by different substrates. So stay with me here.
What's a substrate, by the way?
Excess energy.
Okay.
Excess calories, excess glucose, amino acids. And when we think about mTOR and skeletal muscle, we'll start there. As we think about mTOR and skeletal muscle and longevity, mTOR is stimulated by amino acids, and one amino acid in particular, which is leucine. Leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids. It is one of the branched chain amino acids, meaning we must get it from the diet. There is a certain level of leucine that triggers this mTOR. mTOR then goes on to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In order to protect muscle, in order to grow muscle, you need a bolus of leucine, which is that essential amino acid. In skeletal muscle, this is very important. In skeletal muscle, it is exquisitely sensitive to leucine. In the liver, in the pancreas, in other tissues in the body, it is more sensitive to overall calorie load, carbohydrates, and glucose.
Okay.
So, when we think about stimulating mTOR, it is a good thing in skeletal muscle. In fact, without it, you would become sarcopenic. You would not be able to maintain skeletal muscle mass. So, this idea that stimulating mTOR, because of dietary protein, is going to decrease longevity has never been shown in any human trials. Ever.
Right.
You cannot extrapolate low-quality evidence of C. elegans or rodents or fruit flies and push that over to humans. But we do have randomized control trials. We do know that dietary protein protects individuals, protects their skeletal muscle mass, improves issues with obesity, improves triglyceride when you replace for carbohydrates, improves triglycerides, body composition, hypertension, and a whole slew of other endpoints.
Right.
So this concept, when we talk about longevity, is number one, what are we talking about? Are we talking about you're going to live 5 hours longer? Or are we going to live 6 years longer? What is the endpoint of longevity? The reality is by saying that you are going to reduce dietary protein, the most important macronutrient for protecting skeletal muscle and protein turnover in the body. You have to turn over your liver, your kidney, your heart, all your tissues require amino acids. They require essential amino acids to turn over. If you now restrict that because you're afraid of mTOR stimulation, that makes no sense. Not only that, if you're worried about stimulating mTOR, then you must worry about excess calories, frequent feedings of carbohydrates, and excess calories. That's, if someone really cares, that's where they have to focus. Not only that, if they're worried about cancer, obesity is one of the biggest risk factors. How is it, and this must make people question, why are we targeting protein? From a very conscientious standpoint, why would that be the target? We know that dietary protein affects skeletal muscle. We know that having healthy skeletal muscle improves all-cause mortality. It improves your survivability. Why are we now... You have to ask, what is the agenda behind now saying that protein is bad for longevity?
Right. One of the things that and there was a bunch of people kind of had different variations. One of the things that seemed to kind of explain what you said is that if you do stimulate mTOR, then, and I didn't fully understand it, but it says you must use it, and there wasn't a further explanation on that. So what would they mean by, or what would it be meant by, like, if you are stimulating, if you're not maybe exercising, but you're increasing your protein, etc. But would it mean that it's no good just to kind of have high protein without exercise and actually utilizing that could be detrimental in some way?
If what I'm understanding the question is mTOR stimulation without exercise, is that a negative?
Yeah, that's probably a better way of putting it.
And I would say no.
Okay.
Especially as it relates to protein, because you need to protect skeletal muscle. The only way to protect skeletal muscle is exercise or dietary protein. We have to move away from mTOR stimulation as a negative as it relates to protein, and where it potentially could be negative is if you are in chronic stimulation of mTOR in other tissues, which we are looking at from excess calories.
Okay. So excess calories then also stimulates mTOR then?
In other tissues.
In other tissues.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Right. Okay.
And that's when we, insulin is a driver of mTOR. So if we care about mTOR and we really want to focus on longevity, then I think that there is room for components of keeping calories in check, right? Whether it's calorie restriction, calories matter, but not as it relates to protein. I think that the attack on protein is another way in which individuals are pushing a narrative. Not necessarily perhaps knowing it, but think about it cognitively. Dietary protein protects skeletal muscle. There are multiple stimulants of mTOR, but mTOR is exquisitely sensitive to amino acids in muscle. How is muscle protein synthesis negative? And then when we think about cancer, you have to think about, is something an initiator? Cancer is a disease of the genome. It's a disease of the genome. Is there an initiation phase? I mean, are we talking about an initiator? Are we talking about something that propagates growth? What is it exactly that people are getting at? And I think that is very dangerous when we confuse those things.
So what is IGF-1 then, and what does insulin, that do?
So IGF-1 is an insulin-like growth factor, and that is produced in the liver. And people, I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that normal therapeutic levels of IGF-1, which is a growth factor, right, just based on the name, is negative in terms of when we think about IGF-1, there's a lot of talk of IGF-1 in cancer.
Right.
Well, when individuals are young, their IGF-1 is typically the highest. If that held up, then when individuals are in their prime, when their hormones and IGF-1 levels are the highest, then they would all be getting cancer.
When we spoke just previously about this, a friend, as I said, had cancer, and one of the things it seems that they try to do to him is to reduce things like testosterone or anything that is going to cause things to grow.
That's anabolic.
Right. So is that once that's actually happened, and what's the link between, I suppose, if you've not got cancer and then getting it? Like, I was trying to understand, like, why, and my dad was the same. He had it, and so it seems as though, like, they give you drugs to basically kind of suppress that.
Well, it depends on what kind of cancer. It depends on if it's a hormone-sensitive cancer. I think that cancer is incredibly complex, and it's an incredibly complex disease of the genome, and again, it depends on many different factors.
Right.
But again, we're not talking about people that have cancer. We're talking about, does this IGF-1, does mTOR cause cancer? And I would say, probably not.
No. And that's, I suppose it's easy. And people like myself and lots of people who watch this, it's quite confusing, because it's
very
like, okay,
confusing.
Well, am I going to, if I build the strength and I, take quite a bit more protein than I'm taking, am I going to put myself into a position where I'm going to be more vulnerable to getting cancer? Obviously, none of us want to do that.
No.
But
then we have to think, what are the risk factors for cancer? One of the number one risk factors is obesity. Responsible protein diets don't cause obesity, right? Excess calories, that's an issue. And perhaps we should put our attention to that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. It's like trying to tick off. Okay, right.
Well, I think it's very confusing. There's a lot of information out there, and it becomes very confusing. But I believe that the public deserves to know good scientific information, and I believe that they have the capacity to think about it and, make things logical that make sense for them.
Right.
We know that optimizing body composition is critical. Having a healthy skeletal muscle is critical. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that through resistance training, or obviously cardiovascular base, and a diet that is optimized for protein. It's interesting. Protein intake is the one thing that we know that there is no question that it is good for skeletal muscle. We've argued about fat, which people have gotten wrong. They've argued about carbohydrates. They've gotten wrong there. But you cannot argue dietary protein's importance in the body for protein turnover. Again, protein turnover as it relates to all tissues in the body, as it relates to muscle protein synthesis, as it relates to aging. We've all seen individuals get scrawny and tiny. We know that we have to protect their skeletal muscle. And training alone isn't going to do that, especially as we age. My point being is that we know very clearly the importance of dietary protein. Yet, for some reason now, it's reduced dietary protein, which seems to be ridiculous in my professional opinion. And when we look at the RDA, which is recommended dietary allowance, that's the bare minimum. And the recommended dietary allowance is 0.8 grams per kilogram.
Okay, and on that, because I've got some.
This is important for longevity.
Yeah, I'm trying. Okay,
longevity experts will say you need maybe half that.
Right.
But we know that is the bare minimum to prevent deficiencies.
Okay.
The idea that individuals would now recommend half of the RDA, I think that's somewhat irresponsible and dangerous, especially to an aging population.
So with protein, because there was a bunch of questions on this.
Do you think that we covered their longevity questions?
I was going to come back, but I'll drop this one in whilst you mention it, so I don't forget. So, and I'll come back to longevity. Okay. But in terms of the amount of protein, one, is there a recommended amount? Two, does it change whether you're a man, woman, or an athlete? And also, does it change as you go through life? So if I'm like a teenager, or if I'm in my 30s or 40s, or is it just like there's one thing, it's a pound per body weight, etc.?
Let's start with kids.
Okay.
I have two very little children, and you have two not so little children. Kind of little.
10 and 11, and I'm trying to figure out for them what to do. So this is a really good personal question.
I see how you do it. So when I think about children, first of all, the data on children, they don't do studies on children, obviously. So there's a large gap in the literature. Children are very anabolic. They are growing. They're not just growing wide, they're growing up. Tissue turnover is happening, their bones are developing, their brain is developing. And they are primed for not just muscle protein synthesis, but they're just primed for growth. They can actually get away with much lower amounts of protein per meal, maybe 5 to 10 grams, and still get an anabolic response. The recommendation, and individuals can look this up, 2.2 grams per kilogram, 2 years old, depending on the age. And they're just, in terms of feeding amounts per meal, which we talked about initially, that mTOR stimulation muscle protein synthesis requires a bolus amount, right, of leucine. Kids don't seem to need that. Don't seem to need as much. Very interesting.
What age does that go up to, do you think?
I don't think that we know.
Right.
I don't think that we know. I think that somewhere between 14 and 18, as individuals get older, perhaps 18 is now considered an adult. But again, when individuals are young, healthy, still growing, they can get away with a little bit less protein. And they don't need to be as careful as meal distribution. Meal distribution and the protein hierarchy becomes much more important the older you get. And when I talk about protein hierarchy, I think about how many grams of protein per day, number one. When you're young, really that 24-hour protein period is all that matters. You're very robust, you're training, you don't have to worry about it. But as individuals age, we now need to move into thinking about distribution. I recommend 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. That's high. Individuals could definitely go lower, or they can go higher. We haven't really seen an upper limit of, 3.3 grams per kilogram. We haven't necessarily seen negative effects from upper limits of protein. But again,
there's no negative.
We haven't seen it.
Okay.
There's been meta-analysis. Stu Phillips did a meta-analysis. Maybe he's done 2 about protein impact on kidney.
Yeah.
We know that there's dietary protein is necessary for bone health. It's not the opposite. So again, does protein needs change? Do protein needs change? They do. When you are young, you can get away. You're much more flexible. Even 18, 20, while you still have a very high training volume, you're still much more flexible. And I say this with a caveat. Have you changed your diet? Now, you might be interested. Okay, so forget you. Pretend you're somebody else. The question is, do most people change their dietary habits once they get them ingrained in their 20s and 30s? Most
Probably
people.
Not, I wouldn't have thought.
They don't.
No.
And that is where someone really coming in and teaching good habits is important, whether they are flexible or not in terms of how much protein, but really thinking about the behaviors in which individuals set themselves up for, because it usually takes them into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. So when you're young, 18 to 25, maybe even 30, 24-hour protein intake is important. Can you get away? The bare minimum of the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. Likely for more optimal intake is 1.6 grams per kilogram. Can you move to 1 gram per pound ideal body weight? I believe that that's a great starting point for a few reasons. Number one, it allows for satiation. People are not constantly driven by hunger. It helps with blood sugar regulation. If you bolus it appropriately, meaning in meal distribution, for example, 30 to 55 grams at a meal sitting, this is great. You stimulate your tissue. And also you're doing it if people are worried about longevity or stimulating mTOR, you do it in very discrete meals. So you're not stimulating mTOR all day long, you're doing it in discrete, focused meals. That's what I think. And then the other point is that when individuals age or go through hormonal changes, perimenopause, menopause, dietary protein is really important because that is the time in which they tend to lose muscle mass. Sarcopenia, which I believe begins in your 30s, but really takes a sharp increase in, during those times of hormonal changes, men or women, really. And that's really where your protein intake should increase. Dietary protein intake should not be thought of in terms of percent of calories, which is there's an acceptable macronutrient range, right? There's acceptable macronutrient ranges, and they will recommend that protein can be 10 to 35% of calories. I think doing that in terms of percentage is a huge mistake. Because what if someone has 1,400 calories, with their protein intake is going to be 52 grams, depending on what it is, or if you're meeting the RDA, or if you're at 10%, or 15%, it's going to be too low. So understanding that protein should not be thought about in terms of percentage of calories, but rather the hierarchy of understanding where you are in life, what season you're in, and then having that in, number one, a 24-hour period, and then as you age, or if you are obese even, because that affects your ability to respond to protein.
Really?
Yeah.
What in terms of absorbing it, do you mean?
No, there's some great data out of Nicholas Bird's lab, and he presented some information that obese individuals have more of a blunted anabolic response, which is what happens in aging, whether it's due to inflammation, and that again is that stimulation of mTOR. So really understanding that there is something special about meeting a leucine threshold, which is the minimum of 30 grams of protein up to 55 grams of protein. Right. That becomes valuable and easy to take away.
So if you are obese, as an example, then, does that mean in terms of correcting it, you have to take more protein then, or?
I think calorie control is huge. Yeah. I think understanding, I know that there's a lot of discussion about do calories in, calories out matter? They do. Also understanding where the quality of the calories come from. Dietary protein is more thermogenically expensive. And I'll break that down for you. When you eat dietary protein, and typically we don't eat a macronutrient alone, right? There's fat in it. If you're getting it from a plant-based source, there's going to be carbohydrates in it. But typically, when you ingest, say, a lean piece of 100 calories of a steak, and just make it easy, lean steak, mostly dietary protein, a little bit of fat, the amount of energy it takes to utilize, and I'm going to come back to what it means to utilize that, is about 20 to 30%. So that means you would actually get 80 calories.
Okay.
Your body would see 80 calories because it took 20% or 20 calories to actually deal with that protein. For an older individual or for an obese individual, that's valuable. You can change that. Whereas fat might be 3% or carbohydrates might be 5%. So it's a way to increase calorie expenditure.
Okay.
And that's the thermic effect of food. And I will say that people often believe it's dealing with the nitrogen, just kind of the compound of protein. But actually, in conversation with myself and my mentor, we believe that it's because of the muscle protein synthesis effect. And that when you bolus protein as opposed to eat small amounts throughout the day, you can actually improve your thermic effect of feeding or your thermic effect of food.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So just to finish that piece off then, if you're an athlete or if you're training pretty heavily in age, do you have a higher requirement for protein as opposed to somebody who kind of maybe just does walking and that kind of thing?
I think that this is a really good differentiating point, and I'm going to direct people to the International Society for Sports Nutrition. They actually covered, which is the most, it's a position statement where they take a lot of the researchers who are dealing with athletic people and athletes, and they created a position statement on carbohydrates and dietary proteins, which I think is very valuable. Chad Kurtzik is a friend of mine, and he did a great job at that. And I would say it really depends on the athlete. But yes, and also depends on the sport. I do think improving dietary protein ingestion, again, this is where they talk a lot about the 24-hour feeding window. And again, in terms of optimization of performance, I still believe that why would an individual not hit a leucine threshold? But again, there's some difference of opinion in there. But yeah, they do need it for recovery.
Right.
And then carbohydrates for muscle glycogen.
Okay. And there's also, this was a question that came up as well, different body types, the three different body types. Does the body type impact, so if you are naturally muscular, do you need more or less? And if you're not muscular, does that affect anything in any way, or is that just too much detail to worry about?
I think it's a great question. I don't think we know. But what I do think is interesting is I think the genetics play a huge role in terms of not just the genetics, but also the gut microbiome, which we don't know so much about it. In terms of, I believe that some people do better on a more optimized protein diet, and other people can, for periods of time, do well on a more plant-based diet. I think it really depends, and I think it depends on the cycle of an individual's life, where they are. Of course, I haven't seen that in human literature. In human data yet, but I do think that that's going to be the next frontier. The human body is incredibly adaptable. That also being said, I do believe understanding good foundation science is critical so that we can make good decisions. I believe that you have to protect skeletal muscle at all costs. I don't think that we have an obesity epidemic. I think we have a skeletal muscle epidemic that starts decades before. And one reason we're having such a hard time treating is we're looking at the wrong tissue. We're looking at the shiny object. Because it's much more difficult to do the work early, to not be sedentary, because it's easy. So,
jumping back on to finish off this longevity thing then. So there was David Sinclair, he mentioned about, he was one of the people he mentioned about mTOR, and then he was explaining on his diet, he does some days meat, some days plant to specifically reduce this mTOR effect. I know you're quite a believer, last time we spoke about meat as a protein. What's your view on, should you sort of combine and have meat and plant in relation specifically to that mTOR to a question, or not? I
think this becomes very difficult and complex for the person. And I think it does the average listener or any listener a disservice. Number one, what is the metabolic endpoint goal? Are you looking to protect skeletal muscle or not? If you're looking to protect skeletal muscle, whether you're stimulating mTOR from plant or animal, doesn't matter. It's still gonna, if you hit a leucine threshold, you are still gonna stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Now the next question is, what kind of foods are you choosing? What is the food matrix of the food? For example, it might take 6 cups of quinoa to reach that leucine threshold. Or maybe it takes double the amount of calories for tofu and soy to equal a 3-ounce serving of beef. So the question becomes, what foods are you going to use to stimulate mTOR? And how's that gonna look? There's many ways to decrease mTOR stimulation. Don't eat, fast, or do something else. But the idea that you're going to cycle one day through plant-based proteins versus animal-based proteins, do I think that there's harm in it? I think that it can be done. The question is, again, is that an effective way to do it? If the goal is to dampen mTOR because you're concerned about cancer, then why not do a amino acid restriction fast every 3 months for 5 days, right? Like, there's other ways to do it, but this idea that we would cycle back and forth, I don't know if that's the best strategy.
Okay, that answers that question. And what's your views, or is there any?
And I want to finish something about the food matrix. Okay, guys, I think this is important. Dietary protein, no matter how you get it, it's important. Plant-based proteins have a different amino acid profile than animal-based proteins. That's just the way it goes. It's just biological values. When an individual is on a plant-based diet and really looking to increase their protein, there's 2 ways to do it. Number one, they obviously increase their carbohydrate load from that from those plant sources, so they have to be very active. The other part is individuals are using a lot of processed pea rice blends.
And just on that, just so I'm following you, because that was quite an important point you made. So if you have plant-based protein, in order for you to have plant-based protein in itself has carbohydrates in it, as opposed to a meat protein which doesn't have that.
Not nearly as much,
Right. Okay. So you're naturally
like barely any. You would argue and say, okay, well, yes. So we would say no, it does not have the same profile at all.
So if you have plant-based protein, you're having to consume carbohydrates.
Typically, if they're in their whole food source.
Okay, yeah.
So typically it depends. If you're getting your protein from nuts, which are much more high in fat, you're going to run into metabolic issues of calorie consumption unless you're not very, very active.
Right.
But the issue that I want to point out is we don't eat macronutrients in isolation, which are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. We're not eating them in isolation. We're not saying, oh, can I have my spoonful of saturated fat? Right? That's not really happening. What we have to understand is that above and beyond the macronutrients, foods exist as a food matrix. For example, red meat has iron, selenium, B vitamins, creatine, taurine. It's a food matrix. Even whey protein has immunoglobulins, lactoferrin, alpha-lactalbumin, things that have potentially beneficial effects. When we isolate pea proteins to increase individuals' consumption of protein, we know that 70% of that is pea, but there are other bioactive ingredients that don't exist in nature in that robust amounts that we don't know about. And I do have concerns of what that looks like over the long term. I just don't think we know because it doesn't exist in isolation. So that is really my biggest concern about how are we going to meet protein needs. And it's okay when you're younger, right? You have you're really active and there's, you do have a higher carbohydrate threshold, carbohydrate tolerance, but I think I become worried when we look at taking behaviors into the long term of our life. So that becomes a concern for me. And again, I'm not against a plant-based diet. I don't care. Someone can do whatever they want, right? Everyone has to be responsible for themselves, but I do have some concerns. And I think that we have to be very careful when we say that is a better opportunity for overall health and wellness, I would say that's not true.
And that's because that was my question. That's like in terms of the veggie versus meat protein. But
it's weird. Why are we so divided? Do you know in World War II, we sent millions and millions of soldiers overseas, like upwards of 7 million beyond. Do you know that there was a food on the home front? They were encouraged to grow victory gardens. So individuals, the rationing on the home front, people were encouraged to grow victory gardens and go plant-based, more plant-based, and all the high-quality proteins were sent overseas. Soldiers were rationed at least a pound of meat a day. Injured soldiers were given 250 grams of protein a day. And this is documented, right, in the literature and these accounts. And it's almost as if we're seeing a self-imposed rationing again, 80 years later. And we have to ask ourselves why, who stands to benefit? Is it really the sustainability argument? Is it? If we think about the environment, then we have to talk about transportation, electricity.
Yeah.
Right? This makes up 80-some% of greenhouse gas in the U.S. Right?
Well, you don't most of the time
waste.
people don't realize the logistics behind anything. They're like, oh, okay, well, it's arrived here. Well, yeah, how did you get it there?
Right. So if you live in Minnesota, why are you eating an avocado? Or if you, live in Alaska, you shouldn't have peaches, or whatever it is. And I think that there's a lot of, I would encourage people to take a step back and question where people want to do the right thing. I truly believe that. And one must question, where is the information coming from? Why is it being so pushed forward? I mean, we've been eating meat for millions of years. However, as part of fire and increase in animal protein, whether it's, also fish and hunting, and our brains grew. So I think that it's strange that we would want to eliminate a whole food group and say that somehow that would be healthy. The next question is, who gains to benefit? Who owns this technology? Who owns fake meat technology? Who is standing to benefit? Because it's not the consumer from a health standpoint. It's not just about dietary protein. And I'm not saying just eat meat. I think that you should have plants and fruits and vegetables, right? It is not this huge division. But I think when we become so divided that we're fighting amongst each other, it does the consumer a huge disservice.
Makes it difficult. And is there, because it's such a debate and...
But it's weird. Why is it such a debate?
Yeah, I don't know. You kind of have these weird camps. But is there any strong research that kind of supports one or the other? Or is that still very complex to kind of, make it black and white?
I would say that we know dietary protein in and of itself is phenomenal for the human body. It is an essential macronutrient. You need a very little bit amount of fat. You don't really need carbohydrates, but you need dietary protein. I do believe, and there is data to support, that high quality protein improves body composition. Again, there's a ton of randomized controlled trials. People will say, well, they're small trials. Well, yeah, human studies are difficult to do. Randomized controlled trials in metabolic wards are very difficult. Whether you're using dairy or whether you're using animal-based products, dietary protein, high-quality dietary protein comes out on top. I do believe that. That's not to say that you can't use plant-based products. Again, you can, but as we move into aging and the overall calorie consumption is down, and we want to do a whole foods diet, we're not talking about processed foods, I think we run into issues. And again, it is about the food matrix. It's about bioavailable iron, zinc, selenium, taurine, creatine. I think that this becomes very valuable.
Well, I heard you talking about protein, and I think this is an interesting one because I think we see the word protein and we think it's a thing, but it's not. It's quite complex. So how would you define protein, and what's in it that you could then sort of break out and explain? Yeah.
So I would define protein as it relates to dietary protein. Consists of 20 amino acids. 9 are essential, and meaning you must get them from the diet, and the others are non-essential. Your body can generate them. we don't actually eat for dietary protein. We eat for those essential amino acids. And those essential amino acids are necessary for survival. One way to think about it is understanding that there's protein, in the foods that you eat, foods that contain protein. They typically have all the amino acids, but that's not entirely true, right? So grains are deficient in, sometimes limiting in lysine and methionine. So vegetables can be limiting in methionine. So there are limiting amino acids. And actually every food, protein source has some kind of limiting amino acid, meaning it's, in the lowest amount. In terms of nutrition and dietary protein, when we eat high-quality proteins that are animal-based, that's not an issue. We don't really need to worry about that because animals make the correct amino acid ratio for animals. So skeletal muscle of a steak would nearly match skeletal muscle of a human. And again, it's those amino acids that we need.
Okay.
And plant structure have the correct amino acid ratio for plants.
So what makes the correct ratio then for humans?
So from my perspective, it's all about muscle health.
Okay.
And when we think about muscle health, my number one limiting amino acid is leucine.
Okay.
And we eat for all the, essential amino acids, but when you solve for muscle, everything else falls into place.
Okay.
When you solve for that amino acid leucine, everything else falls into place. And no, you cannot have leucine on its own. People will then ask, well, can I
Yeah, I was going to say that.
leucine?
Can you supplement?
I wouldn't recommend it because of the way in which the amino acids are utilized. There's leucine, isoleucine, and valine are the other branch chain amino acids, and they all must be taken up in a ratio because just the way in which the metabolism goes.
Right. So even though protein is kind of is broken down into these different amino acids, you couldn't you couldn't supplement those effectively.
You wouldn't want to.
You wouldn't,
because
okay.
they do exist in ratios, and again, it's hitting that threshold. So if an individual is plant-based, they need to make sure that if they hit that 2.5 grams of leucine, then they'll hit that amino acid, typically that amino acid ratio that's great for everything else.
Okay.
Again, if you focus on meeting the needs of protein first, then you are not going to be in need for the rest of your body, which is very interesting. For example, arginine. Arginine is a precursor for NO2, which is a vasodilator, nitric oxide. It's one way in which potentially lower protein diets, when you increase protein, can help with blood pressure. Again, we don't eat for protein, we eat for those 20 amino acids, or essentially 9 amino acids.
What about branch chain amino acids then? What are they, and do they play a part in any of this at all?
Well, branch chain amino acids, and that's just referring to the side group of the amino acid, which is, branch chain, and that's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Leucine is the branch chain amino acid that's necessary for muscle stimulation. And typically they're found in all high-quality proteins, whether it's egg, whey, animal-based products, fish.
But you wouldn't do you wouldn't have bread. Oh, you could.
You absolutely could.
Okay.
So if an individual is plant-based, they could do 5 gram 5 gram scoop of branch chain amino acids, or making sure that they're getting 2.5 grams of leucine and then the other amino acids. So in a 2 to 1-to-1 ratio, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and it'll be on the back of the label. Right. But that's one way in which someone could increase the quality of their protein.
And there is stuff, again, there's all kinds of stuff you find online, but there is a link from branch chain amino too much to diabetes. Do you know
I'm
anything
so glad
about
you brought that up. I do. Branch chain amino acids do not cause diabetes. When an individual is diabetic or overweight, there's excess substrate in their bloodstream, whether it's free fatty acids, glucose, or branch chain amino acids. Branch chain amino acids do not cause diabetes. So it is an issue with the cell in and of itself and an excess of everything.
Okay. And another person that's quite popular at the moment is, you must have heard or seen Liver King, where he's...
We love the Liver King. we love the Liver King. My husband loves the Liver King.
Now, he talks about eating organs. What's your, where do you...
Number one, I like to cook all my food.
Okay. So you're not doing sort of sushi with
never,
brain or
never,
anything?
No. I think that organs are very nutrient dense. Very nutrient dense.
And is that something that I was thinking of trying? Like as a kid, I used to eat liver, and I've not had it for years. It's one of those old-fashioned things.
It's an acquired taste.
It is quite nice with some onions. My grandfather
nice.
and grandmother used to do it, and it was always quite. It certainly filled you up.
Yeah.
Very quickly, but. Is it something that you would encourage people to try and put into their diet because it's an effective way of getting?
Yeah, vitamin A and a lot of fat-soluble nutrients, absolutely. One of the things that we do, I'll give you a tip. So I they're called, have you ever had carnivore crisps?
No.
Okay, so we use carnivore crisps, and I give this to my kids.
What are they?
They're dehydrated liver.
Oh, right, okay.
And so,
try that.
So I give, if I give my kids some kind of something crunchy, I'll break some of that up in there, put it in there. They don't know the difference, and it's a way to get it in. And you don't have to actually eat it or cook it in that way.
Okay.
So that's what we do.
All right. And what are your thoughts on? I know you've got some views on this, but there's I think it was started in Singapore where they've got this kind of I don't know if it's synthetic, but this kind of real meat that's been grown.
Why are we doing that? Why don't we just get better at production? Why are we doing this?
Well, they seem to say that it's a more cost-effective way, although it's not that cheap.
How about we cut back on food excess, cut back on obesity, cut back on food waste, and find smart, intelligent ways to manage the population? Just a thought.
Okay, so you're definitely not in the sort of camp of supporting that then.
No. There's got to be. We are a smart world. We need to figure out ways to deal appropriately. If we are dealing with an incredible explosion of obesity, perhaps that's where we start. Not finding other fake ways to feed people, right?
Yeah, it does get a bit weird. I sort of wonder, it probably seems quite safe, but it's probably going to be years before you realize what happens.
We have no idea. And also, I think that, with social media, there's wonderful things to it, but I think that the negative is that we're almost told what to think instead of doing any kind of free thinking for ourselves, instead of questioning, well, where's the profit motive? Why is this happening? How is this even acceptable? Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And
definitely. This becomes an issue. So now you mean to tell me because we can't manage obesity on our own, because there's a huge division between fitness and muscle-centric medicine and understanding that we have the tools to correct it. We're going to now, it's very short-sighted, we're now going to figure out more ways to produce more food to feed more people when we know that individuals are already overeating. And not only that, we're going to create fake meat technology. We are going to fake food. What is the world coming to?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange one.
As opposed to, why don't we all get together and train hard? Why don't we do a couple of AMRAPs and train hard?
I saw Dave Asprey did a post about, I don't know what you thought. I know he's interviewed you once before as well, I think. But he did a post which was quite interesting where it was talking about eating protein and there's this good animal meat and bad animal meat and grass-fed and all this stuff.
Totally disagree.
But he did say something I thought was quite interesting. I want to get your view, which was, he said, look, rather if you have a smaller portion, instead of having like a massive steak, just have a smaller one, and it probably doesn't make too much of a difference whether it's kind of this or that. It's just, control your portion size in some respects. So what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, see, I thought you were going to go somewhere else. I thought you were going to say...
I know on your podcast you did have a bit of a sort of I don't know whether it's a debate, but...
No hard feelings against Dave. In terms of, number one, I thought you were going to say grass-fed versus conventional. And I care about regenerative, but I don't think that individuals should limit their consumption of animal-based products. We're not eating that much. You understand that red meat consumption is down something like 30%. We're eating, the average American eats, 1.8 ounces of meat a day. We're going to cut back on that. So the argument that you're saying is why not, instead of eating one huge steak, go back to a portion size, and I would say, sure, no problem. But we have to understand, what is that 24-hour need? So if you don't eat that big steak and you're cutting your protein intake by 50%, I think that's a bad idea.
Okay.
I think your first meal and your last meal are your most important. I think those both need to be optimized for protein. The rest of the meals, I don't care what you do. I mean, I'm being kind of flippant, but I do care. But no, nail that first meal and nail that last meal.
Right.
First meal of the day, you're catabolic. You're in a catabolic state. By optimizing for muscle protein synthesis, you're doing your body a great favor. Your body is primed, right? Because body is utilizing amino acids to deal with turnover of muscle, of liver, heart, kidney, all that kind of stuff. Set yourself up for that first meal of the day to be optimized, and then that last meal of the day for optimizing protein before you go into an overnight fast.
So in terms of timing, this was something your mentor mentioned about, and he said obviously what you said, and then there was some other research that I found in terms of it's more important when you eat than what you eat. Are those two things, is there sort of a general agreement in terms of, like, do you believe also that it's not what you eat as much in terms of when you eat, and in terms of when you eat, is it get the first meal and the last meal right?
Tricky question.
Because they're kind of similar, and it's like, well, which one?
So I believe, number one, we can do both.
Okay.
I believe that what you eat is most important.
Okay.
What you eat is most important. I mean, whether you're eating a Twinkie diet and excess calories or not, I mean, that's not my first choice. When you eat, I think, number one, what you eat. And then if I were to pick, number two would be when you eat it. But I will also say that if you are aging, you really do need to think about that distribution of food.
And when you say distribution of food, what do you...
first and that last meal.
Oh, okay.
You can't, if you are 70, you shouldn't be fasting all day.
Right.
If you are 70, my recommendation is hit that. And notice I didn't say breakfast, but whether that first meal a day is at 11, you need to optimize for that first meal a day.
Right. So what is that? So if there's, and I've been trying it for a while, and I've gotten quite well. I've been doing intermittent fasting, and you're going to probably tell me that's not good.
I know, you're pretty jacked, so whatever you're doing, I'm sure is fine.
But if say you've kind of got, I kind of like it because it gives me an eating window, and it does help me control my calories.
But are you training?
Sorry?
Are you training?
I train in the evening, so I'm not training fasted. It's sort of, and particularly if I'm traveling, it means that I don't know, it just works, and then it does give me the discipline that in the evening, regardless of where I am and what I'm doing, I'm not eating after that time. I think that's probably the biggest difference for me.
You're also a highly trained individual.
Okay.
You're also a highly trained individual. It's interesting in the literature when we see healthy sedentary adults, that's what they say. So they'll compare two groups. They'll say healthy sedentary adults. Being sedentary is not healthy. Right. So that's actually a sick model, which is interesting. What you're talking about is you are a highly trained individual. You have way more flexibility than a untrained individual.
Right. So if you are doing that first and last meal, then what would be an ideal for someone who's 50s and above? Like what would you say I should be?
50 grams if you want to do it in a time restricted window, which I have no issue with. Get 50 to 55 grams first and last meal.
Okay. And would you?
I don't care when you start that meal.
Okay.
Maybe that meal starts at 2 for you.
And what if that's 50 grams of a protein shake using... Great. Oh, that's fine.
Knock yourself out.
Okay. All right. So protein's good. And
if it's a plant-based protein, I'd recommend 5 grams of creatine. So if an individual is plant-based, you've got to throw in some creatine because you don't get that from plants.
Okay.
If you're using whey, I would still throw in 5 grams of creatine. Why not? It's great for brain function, muscle.
One of the questions that Katie asks about creatine is for a woman.
Great.
Is there any recommendations? And could it be negative in any way?
I haven't seen that be negative. Obviously, people need to check with their physician. I haven't seen the literature that's negative. It's been around for a very long time.
Okay.
And 5 grams of creatine is suitable for both. Also, you asked me a question earlier, men and women, do they need different protein amounts? And I would argue that it's really based on body size. So I'm 110 pounds. I eat maybe 115 grams of protein a day. If I was a male and I was 110 pounds, I'd probably eat the same. So it's because again, it's about that amino acid leucine in terms of blood. of raising that amino acid to a certain blood level of leucine.
Right. And going back to the protein powders then, I've been reading a lot of stuff, as you know, but there's some talk about...
Dr. Google get you too?
Yeah, that's right.
Did the Dr. Google get you? Yeah.
And lots of YouTube videos on double speed. But estrogen, it seems to say pea protein, there's no estrogen in that, but in whey, they say there is. Is that something to be concerned about or not? And is there any recommendations? Because I've interviewed a bunch of people about protein powders, and there's definitely some good and there's definitely bad. So what's your general sort of, quick idiot's guide on protein powders?
Number one, is it a processed food? Are you eating a processed food in terms of whey comes in nature, right? Like, off of a dairy, whatever the dairy product is, there's whey that can be on top. Pea protein has a much higher estrogen-like activity than whey.
Really?
Yes.
When everything, I tried to find that, but everything online seems to say the opposite. Whey, and I'm not saying, obviously I know you're right.
No. I would love to see it. And I actually do have a paper on my Instagram. I broke it down. I think it was from the University of Arkansas somewhere, but it kind of breaks down the estrogen, and I said estrogen-like. There's not estrogen in peas. Estrogen-like activity is much higher in pea protein. Maybe I stand to be corrected, but the most recent evidence that I've read is that. The next question is in terms of protein powder. I love whey protein. Whey protein has other benefits. It is a food matrix. It does exist in nature. It is a food. And I think whey protein has high amounts of those branched chain amino acids. It's a very high quality protein.
Do you know Dr. John Jakish?
Oh yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah, he's
Dr. John, if you are watching, I've been trying to get you on my podcast when he comes to New York.
I'll connect you.
Good. He promised he was coming on.
Okay. Well, he's got a product called Fortigen. You know about it. I've not tried it, and I was going to try it, but he seems to rave about that. Mentioned it was originally created for people in hospitals, and it's meant to be a particular type. Do you know anything about it, and what's your thoughts on that?
I haven't seen him, but he's a very great scientist.
Right.
So he's a PhD. He's done a lot of good things, but I've not seen the product.
Okay. All right. I'll have to try that. If you've been someone that's a lifelong vegan, and you're in your 50s, older in life, and you want to build enough muscle to get the benefits of what you're talking about, is it possible to do that and remain, or do you have to kind of reconsider maybe doing things a little bit differently?
No, I think that you can be vegan and do it. It just takes a lot of extra energy. And really focusing on protein, it also is going to be difficult to get, whole foods protein. You're probably going to want to add in some of those powders and things of that nature. You can do it. You just have to be careful with B12, iron, calcium, some of those nutrients.
So as you get older, and you mentioned this before then, it's going to be a lot more difficult, and you talked about
volume-based, but I've seen it, right? So I do have one of my good friends is 70, believe it or not, Pauline Adeleke, amazing, and she's vegan. And she has been plant-based for years. She's as fit as can be.
Right.
So again, for some people it works. I would say the majority, their focus isn't fitness, right? So that becomes tricky.
Do you just, and a similar question goes to sort of young girls, like my daughter, she just, for whatever reason, she doesn't like meat. She eats fish, but she doesn't like meat. My wife and I are sort of concerned. She does a lot of sport, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I suppose we're a little bit concerned, is she getting enough? It sounds from what you said earlier that when you're younger, you do absorb anything. But what would your recommendations be for someone like that to make sure that she's going to stay strong and grow and her hair's going to be good and all those kind of things?
So that would be a time where you consider a multivitamin.
Okay.
And also getting her iron checked. Just, routine blood work, see where her iron is at, and making sure that she develops on track, which she should, as long as she's eating fish. And then again, just check the levels. So that way there's no guesswork. I think that's important.
So just really, it may not be a problem, but just keep an eye on it.
I think that when we are educated, we can pretty much do whatever we want. Some strategies are going to be easier to follow, and some are not. When I think about what is best for overall health, I have my views, right? I believe that incorporating high-quality protein, red meat, I think there's nothing like it. I think for some people, they don't feel that way. And I have my reasons for why I feel that way. You know, I'm a trained geriatrician, and I just have found that, you know, that wave of youth closes. And it's much more difficult to go back and address frailty and sarcopenia when you're older, because your ability to build, maintain, and really push performance is midlife. And I'm not saying that midlife stops in your 50s, but, you know, as you get to be 60, 70, these things, it becomes more difficult. And also appetite declines. And, you know, I do have my beliefs of what I think is most beneficial from a cognitive standpoint and just from what I've seen.
One of the things that happens when you get older, and Dr. John talks about it as well, is this is the, you know, the osteoporosis and the bones. And one of the things that people say is you need to have more calcium. But I was listening to what you're talking about, something called protein turnover.
Yeah.
What is protein turnover, and what, as it relates specifically to bones, explain your view, because it's not necessarily a calcium deficiency.
So what I think that you're asking about is anabolic resistance.
Well, yeah, I didn't fully understand the term, but you were talking. I know it's something that comes up a lot. I know women, particularly as they get older, get quite concerned about it, and it seems to be more prominent in women in general.
So and this is really important. So protein turnover is something that's happening all the time, whether it's your kidney, your liver, any of your organs, your muscle. It's just this idea of your body is constantly regenerating. When you get older, protein turnover, the effectiveness of it decreases. So we're not as good at cleaning out old cells and turning over tissue. Where it becomes very impactful from a metabolic aspect and from a sarcopenic and osteopenic aspect is really muscle health. And what happens to muscle in that same vein is it becomes anabolically resistant. And anabolic resistance is a decrease in the efficiency to utilize protein, to almost sense protein. What that means is if you eat the way that you did when you were younger, where you didn't really care and maybe you're getting your 10 grams of protein, you don't actually stimulate tissue in this way. The tissue becomes resistant to dietary protein stimulation. One reason why that's a problem is because when you obviously have a destruction of skeletal muscle, you have changes in metabolism and also your ability to pull your muscle and impact bone changes. So those are kind of two separate things. Anabolic resistance, which is that decrease in efficiency of muscle, of protein utilization, can be overcome.
All right.
And the way in which individuals overcome it is by doubling up on dietary protein at one meal. And that's where the 30 to 55 grams comes from. It will protect you from that anabolic resistance.
And would that also include some element of strength training as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's synergistic. In fact, I don't want to confuse anybody, but when you do resistance type training and then you have protein right after, you actually can get away with a little bit less protein because the muscle is stimulated and so you can actually get away with a little bit less protein.
And on that one, I know that's a key question I want to ask. So in terms of your workouts then, before, after, what's recommended in terms of your sort of protein, if at all? Yeah. And does it affect, if you're sort of new to exercise and you've got quite a bit of information and maybe you're sort of still figuring out your gut and stuff, can the sort of protein and the timings be different from someone who's already been, relatively healthy?
When we think about protein timing, again, it's really in a 24-hour period. For a novice exerciser, they don't need protein before. And as long as they're getting protein within that 24-hour period, they're fine. which typically people would say, oh, you need protein right after you work out. And I would say, you don't need it right after you work out, but is there some benefit? Quite possibly if you are obese, or quite possibly if you have any kind of chronic health condition, or if you're older. So the question would be, why not? We know that the data suggests that when you do resistance training, you lower that threshold in terms of anabolic resistance. Your muscle is primed to respond. Having protein right after is very helpful. By doing that, your muscle can respond almost as if it's youthful, a younger muscle.
Right.
So if you're, like your daughter, she could do jujitsu, who cares, get away with it. She could have protein at dinner, she could have protein at breakfast, doesn't matter. And that would be supported by, again, the International Society for Sports Nutrition has a great position statement on dietary protein. But I would argue is that as we are older, or if there's any kind of chronic health condition, dietary protein post-training is very helpful.
Right. And that deals with that issue that we previously talked about, which is the resistance to
anabolically resistant. Yep.
Right. Okay.
Which happens. Yep.
Okay. I can see how it all comes together. So 2 more questions before we finish. I love this because I've learned so much. I've got all my questions answered now. I'm going to send it to anyone if they want to know. When a woman's having a period, does she need to change her workout or her protein intake?
Protein intake, I think, should be stable. In terms of training, again, I'm not an expert in female training cycles, but some of the data would suggest that an individual who is on their period, perhaps that's the time where they're going to make their most gains, or perhaps they're going to PR. I don't know that for sure. I will also say that we see that when female hormones drop, typically, I definitely see this in clinic anecdotally, is there can be a time of injury. So when estrogen is low, or when progesterone low, if an individual is in the perimenopausal phase, oftentimes there does seem to be an increase in potential injury.
So like my wife, if you're doing jiu-jitsu, you need to be careful during those times.
Or if they're a candidate for hormone replacement. Okay. Those are some of the things that I would consider.
Okay, and this is a different one. But if you're a male transitioning to a female, do you change your protein intake?
Again, it's based on body weight, body size. So I would suppose that if an individual is, male going to female?
Right.
I mean, depends on how jacked of, it depends if they're going to be eating then for that ideal body weight.
Right,
so
but it's just really just focus on the body weight as opposed to anything else.
And hormones are a complex subject, and men tend to have higher muscle mass. They do tend to have higher testosterone. This is just at some point the way that it is. So in terms of eating, it really is dependent on what is that person's ideal body weight, what is that hormone situation going to be at that time.
Okay. And then my final question.
Oh, you lied. You said only 2. No, I'm just kidding.
This is a special one bonus one. So do you believe that we could wipe out diabetes if people, and I'm talking about sort of wipe it out permanently, if people followed your principles and they built muscle and they limited their carb intake? Do you believe that that's a sort of a realistic vision?
I do.
You do?
I do. I believe that if we can shift the conversation that insulin resistance begins in skeletal muscle first, and that this happens decades before, and we really target skeletal muscle as the primary instead of the periphery, I think that we can change the world.
Okay, well, there you go then. Now we have to just get on with it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for allowing me to bombard you all these crazy questions.
I do have a new podcast.
Tell us about it.
Yep, it's the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. Very original name. The reason I named it that is so it's easy to find. The premise of the podcast is to have these kind of transparent conversations. There's an aspect of medicine that's critical, but then there's the humanness. And when the humanness collides with the science, I think we have a really interesting conversations. So they can, if your listener is interested, I would love it to get their feedback. It's on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, you name it.
How long have you been doing it now?
1 month.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen you've got lots of episodes, so you've done really one in a month then.
Yes,
you've been very busy.
I have. It's in the top 15 right now, every time I release an episode. And really, it's a labor of love. I want to be able to, much like you, interface with people And individuals can sign up for my newsletter. I typically take a paper and I break down the paper, give, again, resources. It's all free. And if individuals are interested in being a patient, they can apply to be a patient. And I think that's it. So YouTube, podcast,
and a
Instagram,
book as well.
A book that's coming out in a year.
Okay.
So that's very exciting.
And what's that going to be about?
It's going to be about muscle-centric medicine, my friend.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure we put some links and promote. And I definitely recommend checking out the podcast. I did watch a few episodes and it was really fascinating. But beware, because it will just come up with loads of things that you didn't even know you didn't know, which is good, I guess.
Yeah.
So I look forward to seeing you in a few years and seeing how we've progressed.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.